Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio with us today. You will notice that although we will certainly be talking about the pandemic, a lot of this will be religious liberty, because the first article we've posted here appeared in Newsweek, written by Kelly Shackelford. We'll talk about this coalition of religious liberties. We will get into some other topics as well. Certainly Michael Flynn and whether judges or umpires or ringmasters. I thought that was a good piece, if nothing else. Penna Dexter's, of course, is on religious liberty, the Little Sisters again. And I thought maybe I'd give you a couple other updates. There was a whole question about faithless electors. That was before the Supreme Court. And so a couple of key cases. So some of this is going to be front-loaded on legal issues, but we'll also get into what some people have referred to is Obamagate and where we go there. So Penna Dexter, as always, we have lots to cover today.
You know, when you say front-loaded on legal issues, I think it's appropriate because, in a sense, when things change like they've altered so dramatically in recent weeks, one thing we have is our U.S. Constitution. We have our First Amendment right to freedom of religion and speech, and so we can rely on that. And certainly that is what First Liberty has done. And this piece by on Newsweek is titled so well, Religious Liberty is Helping to Reopen America. So fighting these religious liberty cases, churches opening and other things, is actually a foundation for us to retain all of our freedoms that sort of seem at risk right now, or at least we worry about them being so. So I think it's appropriate that we're going this direction today.
You know, again, we're going to talk about a lot of the victories through First Liberty, but if you want to broaden that, I was looking at all the victories, and we mentioned some of those the other day with Alliance Defending Freedom and Beckett and a number of others. This is a good time for these issues, but I think part of it has to do with the fact that we've got very good judges sitting in some of those places. A few judges have not been so good, but certainly there have been some great rulings that I think bring us back to some balance in terms of the Constitution. Kelly, I assume you would agree.
Yeah. I've been getting a lot of calls even from people who are like businessmen from certain states who are believers who are trying to, they're in these states where they have these oppressive governors who are not opening things up even when the numbers are showing that they should. And, they asked me, can we file a lawsuit on behalf of our businesses because we're just getting killed. We're seeing families that have their businesses for their whole lives go away, and they're never going to be able to get these back. And, I said to them, it's kind of similar to this Newsweek article, where I wrote out the same kind of thing, which is religious liberty really is sort of having to lead the way to open the country. And as I was talking to these business guys, I said, let me explain something to you. When you have a pandemic like this, everybody's going to defer to the government to protect public health to some measure. And we knew that this would be an issue, but as we learned more and as the health risk got less, we knew that there would be some people trying to hold on to their government power, even though they really shouldn't be doing it. So we knew that since there wasn't this whole, law in a pandemic, there wasn't any of this, that you'd have to be really careful. So what we did with our first lawsuit, the one in Louisville, is we really waited to the right time, the right facts, right. Drive-in churches. I mean, please, nobody's going to catch the coronavirus. Oh, hey, their automobile was 10 feet from my automobile, and I think I might have it now, right? I mean, that's just ridiculous, right? So the idea that you had government threatening the church, threatening to write down the license plates, criminal actions, when there's zero risk of public health, that was the way to start, right?
Yeah.
And we started, and we won that significant. If people are listening and hadn't read the opinion, I encourage them to read the opinion. It's really powerful. But I was telling these business guys, I said, if we brought a lawsuit on behalf of businesses, that protection in the Constitution is nowhere near what protection would be for freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. So your greatest hope is, number one, that churches will win and open. They will lead the way for you. And all you can really do, and I really do think this is one thing that's been missing with the businesses, is if I was a businessman and I would get together with all the other business leaders in my state, and if I had a governor that was being oppressive like that, and I would start putting out one video every day of another family who had their business destroyed. Mm-hmm. And I would have them at the end point and say, and the reason this happened to us is because of governor, and then you name them. You start having people cry about their family business that's been in place for 100 years and how it was needlessly destroyed. I think after a couple of weeks of that, I think the governor would start to feel some serious pressure about not doing things that don't make sense, And so I do think this article about religious liberty is really helping to reopen. I think it's really technically true. I mean, the church, and how appropriate, right? The church is going to have to lead the way. Mm-hmm. And that means some pastors are going to have to be brave enough to stand up. Every pastor wants to do this safely, but there are tons of ways to do it safely. I mean, a lot of the clients we've had, most churches are under 500 people. They can have people separated by pews, have a couple of services, do different things, make sure everybody's much more safe than, for instance, walking through a Home Depot or a grocery store where there's lots of people and they're touching things. And, I mean, 1 hour on a Sunday where everything's disinfected and where you're with your family but you're a pew apart from anybody else, I mean, that's much safer. So the church can be safe, can lead the way, can have in-person gatherings, and I think that's going to be a key to opening everything up.
I was reading some medical literature about coronavirus yesterday, talking about the sizes of rooms, and if you're in a large room, it's much less dangerous for you.
Very true.
Especially if you don't necessarily have sick people in there. You're hoping you don't, and maybe somebody did cough though and had it. It's just a bigger space for it to go. If you're in smaller spaces, like they're opening hair salons, and I'm thinking they're opening manicures and things like that, where you can't be 10 feet away or 6 feet away from anyone. I mean, that person's working closely on you. So, a church, I mean, just the safety factor, I think it is discriminatory toward churches. And what it is, it's an attitude that they're not essential.
Mm-hmm. That's the
People
other part
that
of
are not believers don't understand that this is essential. It's more essential than, the hair salon and the nail parlor.
What I love about all this is, we've talked a lot about why is religious freedom our first freedom? And we've talked about how it is that if you lose that, you'll lose the rest of your freedoms. Well, now we're seeing it playing out in the pandemic. What are the major lawsuits that are winning back for freedoms? It's not the business lawsuits. It's not any of the other. It's not even freedom of assembly, or it's churches. It's religious freedom. So it's interesting how we're seeing everything we've talked about play out in a time where there is a lot of restriction, oppressive attempts to really reduce liberty of people across the country.
Penna talked about some people don't think church is as essential. This week we quoted from Robert George. You guys know him. He said part of the problem is Christians sometimes haven't thought that churches are essential, and we're losing ground. Maybe we're getting it back. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, governors and mayors have been clamoring for more testing kits and testing stations. I suspect that they know that more testing isn't a panacea, but they don't have much else to say. Therefore, they blame other political leaders and the medical establishment because they don't have enough testing. First, let's inject some reality into this discussion. President Trump would like the public-private partnership to produce 5 million tests a day. This isn't going to happen for many logistical reasons, but even if we could achieve that unlikely goal, we had 157 million Americans in the workforce before the pandemic. At best, that would provide one test per month. Second, let's also consider what these tests really tell us. If you take the rapid test for the coronavirus and get negative results, what does that really tell you? You might not have the virus. You might have the virus but have not shown symptoms, or you might currently have the virus and the test is flawed. And if you doubt that last possibility, consider the fact that when the rapid test was used on 239 known positive samples at the Cleveland Clinic, the test came back positive 85% of the time. Put another way, it was wrong 15% of the time. That means 15% of people who actually were infected could leave not knowing that they have the virus. In the real world, it appears that the problem is even worse. One scientific paper, not yet peer-reviewed, concluded that the real accuracy of some of these tests was closer to 60%. The problem isn't just the test, but the way it is administered. Sometimes people don't shove the swab stick far enough up their nose to get an accurate sample. It's time to inject some reality into this discussion of testing. The mantra from so many politicians that we need more testing sounds good until you look at the numbers. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to talk about reopening the country, and we did that a little bit yesterday because we had Raymond Harris in studio. We talked about opening the country. We've also quoted quite a bit from Dr. Charmaine Yost, who, Penna, you know very well. She and Paul Winfrey the other day put together 12 action items to reopen America. Actually, there are 179 recommendations. Anyway,
That's all coming out of Heritage?
That's all coming out of the Heritage Foundation, National Coronavirus Recovery Commission. And so we hope to have Dr. Charmaine Yost on soon.
That would be great.
We have Chuck Bentley on next week talking about this. He's actually written a special article for Point of View about what he calls coronavirus capitalism, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then Kelly passed on something about Casey Maddox, who was also coming up with about 5 steps to protect public health, regain trust, and ensure liberty. So there's always a little bit of a balance between liberty and safety. But as Kelly was pointing out just a minute ago, it's almost easier, if you think about it, from a legal constitutional point of view, to open up the churches than to try to argue why some mom and pop store down the street needs to open, because in some respects it takes us back to the First Amendment.
That's right. And it's, I think, most believing Christians whose faith is very important to them, we've gotten to the point where people are really feeling it. They're really missing church. I mean, everybody was willing, for the sake of love of neighbor, to stay away from church for a few weeks. But when you see all the businesses starting to open up, maybe not the little mom and pop stores in some cities, but a lot of businesses never had to close. And so when you see that, and it's just it's a cognitive dissonance. I mean, we have a First Amendment right to freedom of religion, and yet our church is not allowed to open. That is, for some people, it's kind of a scary thing. You think, is this the America that I live in? So to go back and rely on the First Amendment of the Constitution and fight for the right of churches to open, and then, of course, the church does not have to open. Just because the right is there doesn't mean if you feel like it's not safe at your church, if you feel like you've got maybe an older demographic that attends your church, so it'd be better to wait. Although those older people also don't know how to get online sometimes. So, I mean, it's an individual, or if you feel like you cannot make it safe, you can't disinfect, you can't do all the things that are necessary to keep it safe. But I think most churches would be willing to do it. And as a matter of fact, financially, it's probably in their best interest to do it, because then they can also safely and hygienically pass an offering plate.
I have heard that a lot of eyes are going to be on, of all things, Denton Bible Church this Sunday, because Denton Bible Church is kind of one of the first sort of mega churches, which has quite a number of individuals. And the church that I attend, Prestonwood, has said, okay, we're going to watch how they're doing this. We still cannot come up with a way in which we could clean the entire sanctuary for the second service.
For people that don't know, it's like 7,200 seats.
So even though they're going to stop, as again, we'll just pick on Tommy Nelson for just a minute. He's going to actually stop on time. I'll see. But nevertheless, I love him. We all know, but he's going to stop on time, so they have an hour to clean. Prestonwood said there's no way we can do that. So what they thought they would do is watch what happens at Denton, make the 9:30 service in the sanctuary, and then have the second service at 11 o'clock at Graham Field, which is the baseball field. Now, as it gets hotter, or if it rains, that won't work so well, but that's kind of an idea. And so up until now, the smaller churches have really needed to get together because they don't probably have Zoom and online. I want Kelly to speak to that, because that's one of the reasons you got involved in those cases out of Kentucky and Mississippi and things like that. The larger churches, they've had a bit of a dip, but it hasn't been devastating because they are certainly online. But these small churches, they really have to get together, or otherwise some of them just are going to be broke, aren't they?
Yeah, they and it's easier for them to do. If you have a church of 300 people, and you have a sanctuary that holds 150. Again, when you have a church of 300 people, it's not like all 300 show up every Sunday, okay? That's not the way the numbers work. And so it's easy for them to handle and to organize that and to make sure everybody's safe. It's a lot harder, I think, for the mega churches that have 5 or 6 or 7,000 people coming in, a number of these churches, are providing masks. Well, that's a lot of masks if you're one of these big churches. Now, if it's 100 people, that's much more doable. Somebody in the church could be making the mask, there's lots of ways to handle that. So there's no reason really for the smaller churches to not be meeting. They can go back. They can do it safely. In fact, again, a lot more safely than anything else people are doing right now.
That's so true.
They make these arguments. A couple of these, cases were filed that we thought were, not handled very well. And the judges, in their opinions, where these people lost, said, well, the churches aren't like a Home Depot or the grocery because, people stay there for a long period of time. And I'm like, you really want to have this argument? It's like the arguments weren't really obviously presented to the judge because, all right, let's have a bet at what the odds are of catching the coronavirus 1 hour on Sunday when everything's been cleaned, when people have masks on, when nobody's touching anything that hasn't been cleaned, when families are together and they're separated like maybe a pew apart from any other families. Let's compare that with a grocery store or Home Depot or all these places where there's thousands of people coming in and out, touching things that aren't being disinfected between other people touching, where you don't know where these people are coming from, where there's all kinds of, where it's all week, every day, it's not 1 hour on Sunday. The comparison is ridiculous. Sure. And the idea that, and this is when we had the argument, this time last week, right? Last Friday, we're in federal court in Kentucky where the governor there
Here we go again.
has said, yeah, Home Depot, yeah, liquor stores, yeah, but not churches.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we said to the judge, Your Honor, if the governor can come forward and show us why you can't catch the coronavirus at Home Depot with all this activity going on, but why the place you really can catch it is for the hour on church on Sunday, we'd love to hear that argument and that evidence. They had no response.
Of course not.
And the only other place they can go with that argument is, well, churches aren't essential. Well, that was going to be problematic to them constitutionally as well. Well, it's interesting how these non-essential, these essential things that you think are so important aren't protected by the Constitution. But this thing that you're saying is not essential is actually protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't make sense what's going on and the restrictions. And I would encourage churches all over the country. Everybody's got to look at their own situation. And, if you're in a hot spot or something like that, you might want to be safe.
Sure.
But you can be safer in that situation than any of the other stuff that people are already doing. So I really, at the smaller church level especially, I don't see any reason why in-person church services should not be coming back. And, of course, in California, where they're being told it might be 3 months, they've said, okay, we've been reasonable. I think there's over 3,000 churches so far.
Yes, I saw that.
They've said, we are coming back on Pentecost weekend, whatever you have to say.
Yes.
And if pastors have to do that, they need to do that, because what's going on is not right, and the church needs to lead the way out.
Let's see if I can, if nothing else, quote from your website just for a second, because you said people ought to read the opinion, which they can, but U.S. District Judge Justin Walker opens by saying, an American mayor criminalized the communal celebration of Easter. That sentence is one that the court never expected to see outside of the pages of a dystopian novel, or perhaps the pages of The Onion, and then moves on a little bit. The mayor's decision is stunning, and it is beyond all reason unconstitutional. That's a pretty good opening for an opinion, don't you think?
It is, and I would just say this. We kind of got bookends right now on behalf of the church. We've got that very first church right before Easter,
yes,
where we filed for drive-in services, won a home run grand slam, which it was the first case in the pandemic period, set the parameters. The Constitution is still in play, and we're not going to allow abuse. And then just this last weekend, we won the second, which is in Kentucky. We won the federal injunction for in-person church services. And it was a statewide injunction protecting every church across the state of Kentucky against these type of government orders. So we've got now drive-in, and now we've got in-person, and we've set the precedent. So now the church needs to start really rising up.
So let's take a break. When we come back, talk about a couple other related issues, then move on. But one of those is a poll shows that there's really a partisan split over this issue of religious freedom. And, of course, Kelly Shackelford and others have put together a coalition of religious liberties. We'll talk about that right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
By the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford with us, and a couple points I wanted to make, and we'll move on to some other topics, and that is, you would think when we talk about religious liberty that even if you aren't really big on religious liberty, you'd still say, well, we should at least protect religious freedom for others. But this latest poll that came from the University of Chicago Divinity School and the Associated Press Center for Public Affairs Research found that Republicans are much more likely than Democrats to say that prohibiting in-person services during the coronavirus outbreak violates religious freedom. Republicans, 49%, almost half, whereas Democrats, 1 in 5, 21%. But it gets worse because then you start asking some more specific questions, because that's kind of a top-level question. But if you get into, okay, do you think that in-person religious services should not be allowed during the pandemic? A majority of Democrats said, yeah, 58% said that, with only a third, that is 34% of Republicans. But again, that doesn't get into the specifics because you would ask restrictions. So if you ask, well, what about if they had restrictions? In other words, followed CDC kinds of things. Still, you find that it's just really lopsided again. Among Republicans, 48% still believe that you could actually meet with restrictions. So if you take those two numbers together, you get almost 80%. Well, only 15% should be allowed without restrictions. But for the Democrats, just 5% of Democrats favor unrestricted in-person worship, 38% with restrictions. You still can't even come up with even anything close to a majority. So the difference is striking.
It's striking.
And I think a lot of it could also be, well, if you believe Donald Trump and Anthony Fauci, or if you're convinced that we are at the end of the world as we know it, there is just a very striking difference right now. And it surfaces with some of these religious liberty rulings, because as Kelly will probably tell us in just a minute, if you got a judge that was put in by Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, they may rule a lot differently than those that were put in by, say, George W. Bush or Donald Trump.
Well, I think it just goes to the reliance upon government that Democrats increasingly have. They trust the government to do right by you, to protect you, and they look to the government for protection in many areas of our life, as far as even economically. And I think that's part of this, because we've got this economic destruction going on. And I think Democrats and liberals are much more likely to expect the government to just make it okay, which a lot of things that the government's doing, they're trying to make it okay, but it's so vast, there's no way. So they're willing to allow government programs, spending, just giveaways, bailouts. They're willing for all that stuff. So the bad part that Republicans see, the destruction of people's livelihoods, isn't so bad for the Democrats. So that's one thing. And I think the other part of this is Democrats and conservatives are just, they believe in the workings of a free society. They believe that will actually work. And I don't think the left does. They think it has to be centrally planned, whereas the right believes that we can be responsible for our own lives. We can, to most extent, make our own way and survive. And so, and then, of course, there are just a lot more Christians and believers in the Republican side of things.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We've done in the past talked about the Democratic Party and how it's moved away from God. I mean, it took God out of the platform. They had that big fight on the floor. Just a lot of these issues, they bragged about how now their largest, new constituency was the no belief in God constituency. And so I just think, when people don't believe in God, they're not going to care as much about a church being able to meet. They don't see that as a big deal.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
And I think it's going to be very important, unless there's a big revival in the country, which, I pray would occur. But if there's not, it's going to be very important to educate people who don't believe in God that if they care about their freedoms, there will be religious freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're seeing it now, but anybody who comes from, an Eastern European country will tell you this. people who are not. We've got a lot of supporters who are not religious at all at First Liberty, but they came from Romania or Hungary or somewhere else, and they can tell you that when the religious freedoms go is when you're about to lose everything else. Mm-hmm. And that's because, the government can't be God and God be God. And so if government is becoming God, then, God's got to be pushed out, and incredible oppression and evil and loss of liberty is coming. And so anybody should be able to appreciate that. And that's one of the things I've seen when we've won some of these victories. What I've seen is people coming to us who aren't religious, who've never supported our work on religious freedom, who have said, I didn't realize how important this was. I'm a freedom-loving, liberty-loving person, and I finally get the connection here, and it's really, really important. And I think we're going to have to educate more people to understand why it is important to have religious freedom, including churches to meet in a safe way.
It's a real picture, I think, for people on the divide. And, you mentioned God and government. And really, I think for many on the left, government is their God. It's the provider of things, and it's the arbiter of things. And so, if you don't believe in God, it's easier for you to accept that.
Yes. You've got some information about this coalition. That's our second article here. And I think I wanted to talk about this partisan split in the poll to illustrate why we just need to put together a coalition of people that continually actually talk about the importance of religious liberty and the importance of making sure that Congress protects these houses of worship.
Yeah, I started seeing the cases that First Liberty did, and it feels like First Liberty has been the leader on doing these cases to protect churches and religious liberty, but other groups have done some of them. And so I was really glad to see the announcement that this coalition, which First Liberty is leading, was actually announced, and there's a press release and everything out this week. And there's some leaders that y'all will recognize in the coalition, and it's a good thing. And it's partly because, the reason for it is because once we do start going back, there'll probably be attacks on churches with regard to perhaps someone might have the virus and say, well, I got it at church, and then you've got legal proceedings started. So churches need immunity from that, or it could be devastating, right, Kelly?
Yeah, we sent a letter on behalf of over 300 ministry leaders, Franklin Graham, Dr. Dobson, Tony Perkins, rabbis, pastors, major pastors, and everybody else saying, look, there's a lot of talk right now about having an immunity shield for more frivolous lawsuits against businesses. And because we want businesses to open. And if, they can be harassed with, and shaken down at a time when they're really low on money, too, and struggling, that would be disastrous for opening up businesses. We were making the point that this applies equally to churches and nonprofits and houses of worship, because what you don't want is if you're a pastor of a major church, for instance, there are people who want to cause you trouble already, right? And if you're looking at maybe your state, there's some guidelines on the church, on how to open safely. But then next door to you, there's another state, and they have some different guidelines. And then federally, the CDC has said they have some suggestions.
Right.
And then, if you don't follow, the suggestion on page 4, footnote 3 of another state, and then now an attorney comes in and says, well, I claim that somebody got COVID-19 from your church, and, you didn't follow this one you could have been more careful.
Yes.
All of a sudden now you got to go through a lawsuit. Yep. There's even been lawsuits filed against cruise ships. So just to show where this goes.
I've got a list here, so we'll go as soon as you get to the break.
The one against cruise ships says they didn't even have the coronavirus.
Right. Yes.
Okay? They filed the lawsuit saying that the cruise ship wasn't safe enough, and that caused them to be concerned and to have emotional trauma.
Emotional distress. And there were actually lawsuits for emotional distress for people that never got the virus.
So every church would be open to this. And so it's crucial for our country that businesses and churches open. And so we need protection. So the legislation that's proposed, and Mike Johnson, Congressman Johnson in the House is I know leading the charge on this. Look, if you're grossly negligent or intentionally do things that are unsafe, you're not protected. But outside of that, you are. And it's kind of the same kind of protection giving to people who are the medical workers or the equipment manufacturers during the COVID-19, that it's the same kind of protection they were given. And that's what should be done to help get our businesses and churches and the religious nonprofits that hand food and do things for people. They should be safe, because we don't want them closed down because of that kind of frivolous lawsuit.
Well, we'll take a break and come back. I might give that short list because the Wall Street Journal listed, and it was shocking, all the lawsuits already against all these different entities. But we'll take a break. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with more right after this.
The Little Sisters of the Poor is a religious order that runs nursing homes for the poor. They're back at the U.S. Supreme Court to hopefully conclude their nearly 8-year battle against the Obamacare contraceptive mandate, obligating these nuns to provide their employees with birth control. Under the Affordable Care Act, workplace health plans are supposed to cover preventative care, which the Obama administration said meant birth control with no out-of-pocket costs. Churches are exempt, and the Hobby Lobby case won exemptions for closely held businesses whose owners hold faith-based objections to the mandate. For Hobby Lobby, the issue was that some contraceptives work by causing abortions. The Obama administration created an accommodation that provided cost-free contraception through alternate means. The Little Sisters argued they need an exemption, not an alternate way to comply with the contraceptive mandate. In 2016, the High Court agreed to hear Zubik v. Burwell, a case that involved the sisters and other nonprofits who sincerely object to paying for contraceptives. Upon the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, to avoid a 4-4 split, the court opted not to rule on the merits and instead vacated the lower court cases and sent them back to their respective states to consider, based on the accommodation. In 2017, the Trump administration issued new rules, providing even broader protections to the Little Sisters and other employers with religious and moral objections to the mandate. Pennsylvania, where the Little Sisters is headquartered, and New Jersey sued, arguing that the Trump administration exceeded its power and that the opt-out proposed by the government does not substantially burden religious exercise. Last week, the justices heard oral arguments via teleconference, with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dialing in from her hospital bed. The current pandemic makes the Little Sisters' work more difficult and much riskier. The justices would do well to hand them a sweeping victory so they can continue the work we as a society need them to do. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes before the top of the hour, and I just might mention, since we're talking about the so-called issue of tort liability, the editors of the Wall Street Journal created a long list. I'll shorten it for a little bit, but they're talking about trial lawyers, they said, are filing suits against emergency supply manufacturers for false advertising, colleges for refusal to refund student fees, of course, the one Kelly just mentioned, against cruise lines for emotional distress, even when a person did not get the virus, retailers for wrongful death. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Nursing homes for negligence. I can think of a governor that deserves that. But anyway, and then governments for denial of hazard pay. And, you know, the argument is being made right now, not that they would win these. The case I've been following is a case out of Chicago where they had one of the people working at Walmart that died of the coronavirus. Now, as tragic that is, just think about the inability, the difficulty of proving that that individual contracted the coronavirus at Walmart. And you recognize that you may not win these lawsuits, but it's just the nuisance. The same thing. If somebody gets the coronavirus and they're in a church, how do you know you got it at church? So, Kelly, the point is not that these cases would go to some kind of success and that they would win, but just imagine the financial burden and just the emotional burden on a pastor at a small church if indeed the lawsuit is brought against them.
Right. I mean, it would be very difficult. It would also, again, you're talking a small church or maybe even a small, nonprofit religious group that is giving people food, that is serving people. A lot of these places are crippled donation-wise right now, the smaller churches, these small groups. And then all of a sudden you have to somehow come up with money to defend a lawsuit? I mean, it could close them down.
Yes.
So it's really important that those kinds of protections are provided. They provided it for the medical workers, for equipment manufacturers, and I really believe it makes a lot of sense to provide that for businesses and for churches and 501c3 nonprofit religious organizations.
If you didn't provide medical workers with some kind of liability protection, a lot of them wouldn't come to work.
That's the point I was going to make.
And the other is a deterrent factor. Some churches
wouldn't come out,
wouldn't open.
Nope.
Simply because of the fear of lawsuits. When you see that Wall Street Journal list, then you would say, well, I'll just stay online because I'm not going to risk that.
I'm waiting for the lawsuit against like Fauci and all the medical guys with their guesses about what was the main one, the main analytics that they were using. I know there's the one in Washington.
Yeah, and there's the one out of London, which again is the Imperial College one, 2.2 million.
I'm waiting for that lawsuit. How many people died because they didn't have the data correct? So
not only died, how many businesses were lost and jobs lost?
Exactly.
Well said. You did say something in passing, Kelly, I'd like to come back to, and that is if one statement by the governor is different than another statement by the judge or something else, and since we're right now broadcasting primarily in Texas, although we have listeners all over the country that have tuned into this even online, there has been an interesting set of circumstances because where we're broadcasting right now is in Dallas County, and Judge Jenkins has one set of rules, and the governor, Greg Abbott, has a different set of rules. And so somebody that you've known for many years and encouraged even to run for office in the first place, Ken Paxton, who's the Attorney General, said, we need to resolve some of this, don't we?
Yeah, thank God for Ken Paxton as Attorney General. He's been pushing the whole time for less restrictions, and even for the suggestions or guidelines, he's been pushing that they not be enforced by any sort of criminal action or anything like that. So the governor ended up going his way with the last order. So, for instance, he said, we suggest you wear a mask, but he took off all the enforcement of that. Like, there will be no criminal penalties against people who don't wear masks because of the horrible situations we were seeing, like in the bus in Pennsylvania when they dragged this guy off and, with like 10 police officers because he didn't have a mask on. I mean, just crazy stuff. So what happens now is you've got these, these people like Jenkins who all of a sudden have power they never dreamed of in their life, and they think that they're now everybody's mother and that they can tell everybody what to do and how to live their life. And the governor overruled those. The governor, when it comes to all these restrictions, the governor's order takes precedence. And so they can't go above his order. And that's what Jenkins was trying to do. That's what not only Dallas County, down in San Antonio, and there's a number of places. So Attorney General Paxton sent a letter to them. I thought he was much kinder than he should have been. But he basically said, cut it out, okay? You can't, you're confusing people when you act like you can tell them to do things that you have no authority to go beyond what the governor has laid out as the restrictions. And so, he kind of had to slap their hands, and they've now kind of backed off because they know legally they have no leg to stand on. But good for him for saying, look, I represent the people of Texas, and you're trying to take away people's freedoms in an illegal way because you're trying to threaten them with power you don't have, because the governor has laid out these restrictions. So And I think people need to understand even the restrictions the governor laid out, they're not restrictions, they're suggestions instead of requirements. And so they're guidelines. So they're not things where you're going to be criminally punished. And so I think we need to understand it is important who you elect, who your attorney general is, who your governor is, because I wonder if that's not going to be one of the huge lessons going on right now. Everybody can look around the country at what's happening with governors who are, acting one way versus governors acting another. And I wonder if this is not going to inform them on who they vote for president.
And governor.
Yeah. But if you're watching the governor of Illinois, who's Democrat, the governor of Washington, the most extreme,
Michigan.
outrageous, Michigan, Illinois, Washington State, Washington State is now saying that if you go into a restaurant, you have to give all your personal information so they can track you in case somebody ever gets sick. It's like, Germany, it's like your papers, please, right? It's stuff that people don't agree with around the country. And I just wonder, and then look at, Texas, Georgia, the governors there who are Republican, who have been attacked for being reckless. Meanwhile, their numbers are not any worse than the other states. So there's all this carnage occurring to our economy in these states that won't open up and give freedom, that are all Democratic governors. And the other side, the people they say are like these yahoos that are, Wild West and opening everything up. But there aren't any negative consequences, and they're avoiding the shutdown consequences now. So I wonder if people are not going to look at that because there's such a party difference right now, and that's going to inform their decision on president. I don't know. I think it might have an impact. There's
one governor I want to add to the list of those who are being, in a sense, wiser, more conservative, more open, and that is DeSantis in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, people really worried about Florida because of the elderly population, and yet their numbers, even despite the rough start with spring break at the beaches, their numbers have been pretty good, and they've been fairly relaxed about the restrictions and continuing to relax them. And Florida's numbers, they were the first ones to make it easier to do business, and it's been 2 weeks, and the numbers are not, they're not getting bad reactions to it at all. So It's interesting.
Yeah, I love what Dinesh D'Souza says. If you want to understand media bias, look at the fact that the approval numbers for Andrew Cuomo are going up and the approval numbers for DeSantis are going down when DeSantis has done a much better job than Cuomo. And so in some respects, it's where the facts are, not the way the media covers it. Let's take a break, though. We will be back right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition here at Point of View. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. If you go to our website, you're going to first of all find a very good article by Kelly Shackelford that appeared in Newsweek. We'll get to that a little bit later on religious liberty is helping to reopen America. We'll talk about some of these religious coalitions, but I did want to get to one of the stories we've been following because it is such a curious one indeed. We followed the plight of course, the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. And when you finally get to a point, Penna Dexter, when the prosecution, I guess that would be the Justice Department, and the defense agree that there's no longer a case, you would think it would be over. And if you thought that, you would be right most of the time, but not in the courtroom of Judge Emmett Sullivan. So the third article we've posted here today is by Alan Dershowitz, and I wanted to use that one, if nothing else, to point out that it isn't just people that have a conservative point of view or people that support Donald Trump. There are a number of people that are legal scholars that are very disturbed about what's taken place.
This Judge Sullivan has really refused to drop the case. He's called for briefs from people outside the case. And really, this has been an abuse of Flynn's rights. And it's so great that the case should be dropped until Judge Sullivan pulled this. He's also pulling in a retired judge to sort of coordinate things. And so it was great to see this piece in the Wall Street Journal to remind us that judges are umpires, not ringmasters. It's by Alan Dershowitz, who's no conservative, but he has the right idea on the Constitution. And he says the Constitution limits the jurisdiction of federal judges to actual cases and controversies. They may not offer advisory opinions or intrude on executive or legislative powers. And many judges actually disapprove of this limitation on their power. They're not happy being umpires, it says. Dershowitz says they want to be commissioner of baseball. And that's really the case with this Judge Sullivan. That's what he wants. It's more of I think, a political desire to hold power and hold sway than the true role of a judge.
You know, Kelly, let's come to you, obviously. And some people might say, well, I don't know Michael Flynn, but I just say if they can do this to the former National Security Advisor, they can do it to you. And this looks more like a banana republic. But what are your thoughts about this?
Well, you know, we can get into the actual criminal prosecution itself, which, you know, obviously it's so disturbing that the Attorney General has had to pull somebody in to do an independent review, somebody who spent 10 years in the FBI and a number of years in the DOJ. And the result is finding a lot of really, really horrible information that you would never want to find in anybody prosecuting an American citizen. We can get into all those details. But the thing that's really disturbing here is this judge is totally abusing his power. I think he's acting unethically. This is really, you know, the rule of law is under attack. And it was under attack, number one, because you had these people in the FBI and the CIA, and you know, abusing their authority in the DOJ to essentially politicize the legal criminal side of things, to go after people. It's like they're watching, you know, they're listening to the conversations of people of their political opponent. I mean, it sounds like a another, a banana republic or something. I mean, this is highly destructive. I mean, this is close to treason as I can think of when you take the apparatus of the intelligence agencies and you use them to spy on your political opponent. And that's all horrible. But the idea that then you get into court, you've got one of these people in a criminal matter, it's found out that they really abused their authority. They weren't fair. They were trying to set somebody up, all these types of things. So the Attorney General comes forward and say, look, we've got to respect the rule of law. We don't do this to our citizens. We are withdrawing. And the judge becomes the politician, and the judge says, well, wait, I'm not going to let you do that. I'm going to invite somebody who's been making public statements disagreeing with, pulling the prosecution. That's not the role of the judge. The judge isn't a prosecutor. The judge has no authority in the executive branch. I mean, a way to bring it home to people, I guess, is can you imagine if the local DA decided he was going to prosecute you, and you knew you didn't do anything wrong, but he decided he was going to because some people underneath him gave him some bad information. And let's say that you're in court and he's prosecuted you, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, and so you agree to some lesser thing to get off. You say, oh, I'll admit to a misdemeanor even though I didn't do anything, and then the DA finds out, hey, wait, there was a lot of bad things that went on here. I'm withdrawing this. You should not have been prosecuted. The judge can't say, well, I don't like that, so I'm going to have you prosecuted anyway. And, in fact, I'm going to invite some people who don't like you to come in, and they'll be the prosecutors now. Excuse me? Well, the way this thing works is there are two parties. There's the government. In this case, the prosecutor, the DOJ, is the one bringing these claims against a person, and there's that person, the defendant. The judge is not a party to the case. The judge is supposed to be the umpire, and so this is really unseemly. It's really, I think it's very damaging to the whole ability of people to respect the rule of law and that things are done fairly. I think the judge shouldn't be on the bench anymore. I just think this is really, really bad, and it sends a lot of very bad messages to the people of the country, which is that, our judicial system has now been politicized, and that's something we have to avoid, or we become a banana republic without the rule of law.
So he's done this. He's appointed this retired judge to, file a brief and coordinate things, other briefs. So, when people look at this, the way we're looking at it, the way Dershowitz is looking at it, is there any recourse? Is there anything to do?
Yeah, you can file an appeal immediately and ask for what's called a writ of prohibition, which is a higher court, and this is very rare, so you just don't see this very often. Usually judges don't go so outside of their authority that this has to happen. We've actually gotten one of those before at First Liberty. We had, I don't know if you remember the case in outside of San Antonio where the valedictorian was restricted, and they actually issued an order in this case that anyone who mentioned God at the graduation was going to be punished by the judge with contempt of court. And so that's when we went up to the Court of Appeals and said, we need a writ of prohibition. This judge is out of control and has no authority for what they're doing. And we won that writ of prohibition, which is, again, it's very... So
who would it be that would go try to get that?
It would be in this case, it would be either the defendant or, it could be either party, because they're both having this judge acting appropriately. They could go to the D.C. Court of Appeals and try to get this judge under control. I don't know whether they'll wait and see what he does first or do it immediately, but they have that option if they want to.
Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll get into a lot of these religious liberty issues, especially as churches are opening. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, governors and mayors have been clamoring for more testing kits and testing stations. I suspect that they know that more testing isn't a panacea, but they don't have much else to say. Therefore, they blame other political leaders and the medical establishment because they don't have enough testing. First, let's inject some reality into this discussion. President Trump would like the public-private partnership to produce 5 million tests a day. This isn't going to happen for many logistical reasons, but even if we could achieve that unlikely goal, we had 157 million Americans in the workforce before the pandemic. At best, that would provide one test per month. Second, let's also consider what these tests really tell us. If you take the rapid test for the coronavirus and get negative results, what does that really tell you? You might not have the virus. You might have the virus but have not shown symptoms, or you might currently have the virus and the test is flawed. And if you doubt that last possibility, consider the fact that when the rapid test was used on 239 known positive samples at the Cleveland Clinic, the test came back positive 85% of the time. Put another way, it was wrong 15% of the time. That means 15% of people who actually were infected could leave not knowing that they have the virus. In the real world, it appears that the problem is even worse. One scientific paper, not yet peer-reviewed, concluded that the real accuracy of some of these tests was closer to 60%. The problem isn't just the test, but the way it is administered. Sometimes people don't shove the swab stick far enough up their nose to get an accurate sample. It's time to inject some reality into this discussion of testing. The mantra from so many politicians that we need more testing sounds good until you look at the numbers. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. And, you know, one of the things we've been talking about is that sometimes you can set a precedent that you don't want. And many years ago, Penna, we said at the time when after 9/11, there was this desire to have the Patriot Act and the FISA warrants and everything. And even at the time, we're saying to the Republicans, well, you like this because right now the Attorney General is John Ashcroft, but there might be an Attorney General, Eric Holder, that might do things a little differently. We were even saying during the Obama administration, you know, you like this idea of all the executive orders that Barack Obama's bringing, but maybe later you might have a Republican governor or maybe a Republican senator that becomes president, and maybe Ted Cruz wouldn't do it, but hey, look what happened. Donald Trump did it, and now we have the same thing. David Horsani says, you know, according to the standards now set by the Obama administration and by the people defending all of this, it would be no big deal if Donald Trump's Department of Justice opened criminal investigations into a high-profile Democrat, they say like John Kerry, or it would be no big deal if the Department of Justice opened up investigations into Democrats who have taken money from foreign powers. It would be fine even after the election that you would leave out any kind of damaging what's called exculpatory evidence. And if Joe Biden were to win the presidency, it'd be no big deal if Donald Trump's Department of Justice snooped on the incoming calls by the national security individual, like maybe a John Kerry or others. And of course, as soon as you say that, people say, oh, no, we wouldn't allow that. Those would be treasonous acts. But we're starting to find out, Penna, that some of these pieces of evidence that are now starting to surface because of the Department of Justice and John Durham, some of the work being done by the lawyer for Michael Flynn are starting to say that's exactly what happened in the Obama administration. And if you have the Trump administration doing this right now, there'd be people wanting to have another impeachment trial, right?
Right. Now, there is something being done, and that is Bill Barr is cleaning up the Justice Department and also the FISA rules and other things. So to make it, it might be harder to do some of these things just because of that, because it's going back to where it should be. But yes, and you know, it's so partisan, and I worry when I see President Trump rely so much on the executive order and directives coming from the White House. It's sometimes necessary because the Congress has just been so weak and really not very useful.
But it's not the way to run a government.
But it's not the way to run a government, and it makes for continual chaos and more. So, you know, this is just, you know, we're watching right now, though it's taken all these years, 3.5 years really, for us to see how badly the FBI and the Justice Department powers have been abused.
Well, and look, this only happens because people at the very top were behind it. And so, I mean, this is sort of being referred to now as Obamagate, and it's appropriate. I don't know for sure if he was the one that orchestrated all this or it was somebody right underneath him. And I wouldn't, when I say right underneath him, I don't know that I'd say Biden. I just don't think he's competent enough to organize much of anything. But I think a lot of the other people underneath him, the head of the CIA, these people were clearly engaged in conduct that's reprehensible. The one thing that, and I don't care if you're left wing or right wing or Democrat or Republican, just for your own interest, you do not want the president and all these leaders of the intelligence agencies to be able to spy on their political opponent and then get away with it. I mean, if this is the new approach, if what happened is okay, then okay, President Trump gets to do all this now. Is that what you want? I mean, you got to be insane not to want to stop this. I mean, this will destroy your country. What happened was, the biggest political scam in the history of the country. It is abuse that I think no American ever imagined would ever occur in this country. And we know it occurred now. I mean, the unmasking of Flynn, 39 times. And the unmasking are not by people lower down the chain. We're talking about the very top people, and then now conversations with the President Obama on this, admitting that he was aware of what was going on. It's pretty clear that what happened is they were essentially wiretapping and listening in they had all these targets because they knew that Trump and his people would be talking to those people. So they couldn't get a warrant to get these things. So what they did is you don't have to have probable cause and meet the Fourth Amendment to go after foreign people. So they had a bunch of foreign people, and any Trump or any of his people were talking to them, they knew they would get them that way. So they essentially, what they did is they spied on the opposite campaign of their party in a surreptitious way, and they really just violated the Fourth Amendment in all kinds of different ways because it's clear what they were really doing. And no one should want this to ever happen again. I mean, again, I think this is close to treason because this will destroy your country, and the idea that you would use the intelligence apparatus for political reasons to spy on your opponent in a campaign is, that's horrible. The fact that they continued this after he came into office and did all the reprehensible things after that just makes it worse.
And, the unmasking that took place is bad enough. Really no reason to unmask. And so many high government officials, as you said, did so and signed the authorizations. But then, not keeping it to themselves, they leaked it to the media. So
to
It was so political, so the American people all see this. And then I think that's part of what allowed this 3 years of Russia collusion investigation that, although it did not remove the president from office, it certainly it was something that was such a drag on this president to be able to move forward and try to do what he was elected to do with always this dogging him, the whole time that he's been president. And it just hasn't stopped.
Well, and example of this is the entire impeachment process was going on when the pandemic broke. And, thank goodness President Trump already had sort of instincts to be willing to do something no other president would have been willing to do, which is shut the border when it comes to people coming from China. I mean, I don't think any president would have probably done what he did at the time bold. He did it. And he did it in the middle of impeachment, okay? But that's the president. How many people were being distracted by the impeachment? How many people in Congress that could have done, maybe had other thoughts or something about the pandemic? How many people in the executive branch? I mean, how many people were affected by that? I mean, so this stuff affects real lives. There might have been, I don't know, but there might have been things that would have been caught or done or seen that would have saved, tens of thousands of American lives. But because they were, doing something ridiculous, this whole impeachment process, everybody was focused all their energy on that. So, I mean, that's one of a lot of reasons. But I think everybody understands immediately that you really the criminalization of politics is what is so dangerous. And to take the FBI and the DOJ and the CIA and to use them as political weapons is something that it has to be one of the greatest, criminal violations that we punish in this country. And so I am hopeful that the investigation that's going on right now will come up with results where people will pay for what they did, because the message needs to be strong that no one would ever want to do this again. And unless there's some consequences, then anybody else who wants to abuse their power in those ways will be open to do so as well.
There was so much lying going on. The one picture I have in my mind is of Brennan, CIA, and being asked if he knew of any ambassadors that unmasked any of this Michael Flynn stuff. And he just said nothing came to mind. And when you had the ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, how many unmasking requests did she make? It was like 39 or something. And she said other people were doing it in my name. But there's so much lying going on. There's so much covering up. And, I agree. I used to think when Trump became president and early on, well, okay, let's just move forward with his agenda. And maybe we shouldn't concentrate so much on criticizing those in the prior administration, but we have to deal with it or it will just continue.
Well, again, we've got a lot more to cover, but we'll move on to another topic because we have the first article here, Kelly Shackelford's piece in Newsweek. So we thought we'd talk about religious liberty. Penna Dexter has a piece, of course, that we'll be hearing on Little Sisters of the Poor. A lot more to cover. We will do so right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and we might just focus some time and attention right now on religious liberty. First, we'll talk about religious liberty and the churches, and that is the first article that we have posted here. It was written by Kelly Shackelford, appeared in Newsweek. A little bit later, either this hour or next, I want to get into religious liberty for the military for a couple of reasons. First of all, Michael Berry's been on the front aligns on that issue. A letter went to the Secretary of Defense in that regard. And even on Monday, we've got General Boykin on to talk a little bit about that. Maybe we can get Michael Berry on later in the week because there's a great resource there. And while we're talking about religious liberty, also, of course, the Little Sisters of the Poor, which is Penna Dexter's commentary. But Penna, this was just a great piece. It's always fun to see Kelly Shackelford's name anywhere, but in Newsweek, that was really very well written. And it talks about how religious liberty is really helping open up America.
Which is, I mean, it makes sense if you really think about it, because religious liberty is based on the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, and our freedom of religion, where liberty to do business is not based on that. Certainly those freedoms need to be protected, but this one is key and core to the whole nation. And really looking at the churches, too, right now, I mean, they're struggling. A lot of, especially smaller churches, this is the greatest disruption to religious activity in the history of the nation. Churches and Christians have been willing to go along with it for safety, but you can't do it forever. And the time is well past beginning to see how we open churches back up. Many churches report that their offerings have diminished, for one thing, and some might not survive this. So, and Americans who are believers, we need to meet together. It's commanded in Scripture. So it was good to see Kelly just make a point and it was published in Newsweek, that it's actually religious liberty that's leading the way for reopening the entire country. And it might sound surprising or counterintuitive, but it's really not when you look at the Constitution. So it seemed like a lot of these elected officials, certain governors have been so wise about it, but a lot of elected officials have really, become tyrants in a sense, or enjoyed the power. And they've been issuing draconian orders about churches that have been unfair and not even as free as they've allowed businesses to be. So it was just good to see this piece in Newsweek. We posted it at pointofview.net, and it's needed right now because it is going to be the churches and the opening of churches and the validation of the religious liberty that's in our Constitution that begins to get America opened up again. Yeah, the sooner the better.
I encourage people to go to pointofview.net and grab this article and share it with other people, because I think this is really important, and I think most people are missing it. And I think it's an opportunity for people of faith to sort of help educate people of how crucial religious liberty is to our country. And, an example is, I've gotten calls from business leaders in states where some of these oppressive governors are trying to shut everything down, and they're just destroying business. And these are the ones that are going way over what they need to be doing right now, as everything is opening up in a lot of the other parts of the country. And they said, should we file a lawsuit on behalf of, our businesses? And I pointed out, no. There are no, the constitutional rights protecting your ability to do your business are nowhere near the level as First Amendment rights, like freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. So those cases, those church cases, are the first ones that have the power to actually go against these governors who, because, you realize if you're a judge, you're going to give deference to public officials who say they're trying to protect public health. So there's going to be some pretty heavy weight that direction. So if you're trying to say, yeah, but they're going over the line here, you need a fundamental constitutional right. Well, there's not a fundamental constitutional right to business. There is to speech, to religion, to freedom of assembly. And so these church cases are the ones that are really opening the way. And when we win those cases, they open the ability for businesses. And so, I think it's appropriate. The first case ever in a pandemic on constitutional rights was our case in Louisville on the right of the church to have their drive-in services. And it was right before Easter, and it was a knockout victory. Judge Walker issued a powerful opinion. And it reminded everybody, hey, because people were beginning to wonder. They watched a father being handcuffed in front of his, child because he was throwing a baseball, in the park. We saw a guy come off the beach and get arrested. We were viewing these things and we thought, is this our country? You know, have you lost the Constitution? That opinion said, yes, we're still a constitutional republic. Yes, the Constitution applies. And this type of abuse by governors is not going to be upheld. In that case, it was a mayor. And then, of course, this last weekend, we won the case in Kentucky on behalf of all churches meeting back in person, doing so safely. But the fact that you can't say you can go to Home Depot, you can go to a liquor store, you can do all these things, but you can't meet in church for 1 hour a week when it's done in a very safe and way with social distancing and everything else. So these church cases, if you're a business person and you might think, oh, I don't even care anything about religion. Well, you do now, because if those church cases open things up for freedom for churches, it's going to affect dramatically when you open your business for business. So I think people need to, we've talked about this a lot before. Religious freedom is our first freedom. And the reason is if you lose it, you lose everything. And it's now showing us that if we're going to open things back up and get full freedom and victory, the church is going to have to lead the way. And that's what's happening with these major victories that we're winning. In fact, if people all hear all this discouraging news, if they go to firstliberty.org, we have a whole section dedicated to COVID-19.
Right.
What are your rights as a church? What is the law, et cetera? But there's one that says victories. And it's just pages of the victories we've won. We haven't lost a single case so far during the pandemic. So you can win all these cases if you're smart in how you do them. And the church is going to have to lead the way. And it's time in these places where governors are going over the line. I mean, Illinois saying that they're not going to allow churches to, the governor saying he's not going to allow churches to open until they find a vaccine. California, where he said it might be 3 more months before he allows churches to meet. Well, I think appropriately what's happening in California is over 3,000 churches have signed a public statement saying on Pentecost weekend, the end of May, we will be meeting again, no matter what the governor says. We're going to do it safely. We're going to make sure. And they can do it much more safely, by the way, in most churches than you can in Home Depot and all these other places. I mean, it's 1 hour a week. You can disinfect everything. You can keep people apart. There's lots of ways to do it. But the point is, pastors are going to have to lead the way. Churches are going to have to lead the way to get full freedom back across the country.
I just think it would be good to be able to say what the role of a governor is in this, because, we've got governors across the country. Some governors are, yes, they're issuing guidelines. They're issuing safety precautions that we never even thought about before this coronavirus. We never even thought they were necessary. But most of the time, they're guidelines. They're not like edicts. But so can governors issue edicts about this thing? I mean, it seems like they can to some degree.
Well, the way it works is federally in the Constitution, the federal government only has authority over its enumerated powers. In other words, if there's something specifically enumerated, then the federal government has power over, then it has power over that. Outside of that, the 10th Amendment says all the remaining power is given to the states and to the people individually. And so states have always traditionally had what's called the police power, the power over things like health and safety of their state. And so that's why Trump didn't tell them what they had to do. He laid out guidelines. So these governors have that ability. Now, if the legislature wants to take over and say, in our state, the legislature controls this, they can. But in most places, the legislature has allowed the governor to do things in a sort of an emergency way because they knew there might not be time to go through the whole legislative process. So a lot of these orders are governors that are saying they're trying to protect health and safety. However, there are limitations on that constitutionally. If you interfere with with a fundamental constitutional right, like free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, etc., you have to prove that this compelling governmental interest of health and safety that you're saying you're meeting, you have to prove that what you're doing that is taking away liberty is required for you to have the health and safety, and that it's the most narrow way to do that you can. They can't say, well, I'm doing health and safety, so I'm just going to strip away all these liberties. They go, no.
Seems like that's what they're doing. Some of them are doing.
And that's when you go after them, you can bring them back into line. And that's what we've done with these church cases. And it's very important because it really is setting the parameters for all of people's freedoms. And the church is having to lead the way.
Let's take a break, and I encourage you even during the break to go to firstliberty.org. We're going to talk about some action items, and if you're listening online, you'll hear Penna Dexter talking about the Little Sisters of the Poor once again. We'll be right back.
The Little Sisters of the Poor is a religious order that runs nursing homes for the poor. They're back at the U.S. Supreme Court to hopefully conclude their nearly 8-year battle against the Obamacare contraceptive mandate, obligating these nuns to provide their employees with birth control. Under the Affordable Care Act, workplace health plans are supposed to cover preventative care, which the Obama administration said meant birth control with no out-of-pocket costs. Churches are exempt, and the Hobby Lobby case won exemptions for closely held businesses whose owners hold faith-based objections to the mandate. For Hobby Lobby, the issue was that some contraceptives work by causing abortions. The Obama administration created an accommodation that provided cost-free contraception through alternate means. The Little Sisters argued they need an exemption, not an alternate way to comply with the contraceptive mandate. In 2016, the High Court agreed to hear Zubik v. Burwell, a case that involved the sisters and other nonprofits who sincerely object to paying for contraceptives. Upon the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, to avoid a 4-4 split, the court opted not to rule on the merits and instead vacated the lower court cases and sent them back to their respective states to consider, based on the accommodation. In 2017, the Trump administration issued new rules, providing even broader protections to the Little Sisters and other employers with religious and moral objections to the mandate. Pennsylvania, where the Little Sisters is headquartered, and New Jersey sued, arguing that the Trump administration exceeded its power and that the opt-out proposed by the government does not substantially burden religious exercise. Last week, the justices heard oral arguments via teleconference, with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dialing in from her hospital bed. The current pandemic makes the Little Sisters' work more difficult and much riskier. The justices would do well to hand them a sweeping victory so they can continue the work we as a society need them to do. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. If you're listening online, you know that right now this is when we oftentimes play Penna Dexter's commentary on Little Sisters again. I thought we solved this a long time ago. Where are we?
You could be excused for thinking that. It's been actually almost 8 years that the Little Sisters of the Poor have been trying to protect their rights, not to provide health care to their employees without them providing birth control coverage. And it's been back and forth to the Supreme Court. Now, the Little Sisters of the Poor, remember, are actually nuns that run this. It's a religious order that runs nursing homes for the poor. They provide all kinds of services for the elderly poor. And it's an 8-year battle. It's against the contraceptive mandate. And one thing I think people could be excused for saying is, well, what about that Hobby Lobby case? Why didn't that protect the ability not to have to abide by the contraceptive mandate? It did for closely held businesses. But for nonprofits, they were fighting their own battle. And they actually they got a sort of a mixed type ruling, and they vacated some of the lower court rulings after Hobby Lobby. But the states, especially the state of Pennsylvania, where Little Sisters of the Poor is headquartered, and New Jersey and some other states, still kept coming back and trying to require them to have to abide by the contraceptive mandate and provide contraception coverage to their employees. Another thing that happened was that the Obama administration came out with what they said was an accommodation, where, okay, you don't actually have to provide this insurance, but if you sign this form, then it will still be provided to the employees. So an action taken by the organization would have resulted in contraceptive coverage, and that was still against the conscience. It violated their conscience and their religious beliefs. They said they couldn't do it. So it's and then one other piece to this is that in 2017, the Trump administration issued rules protecting, very broad protections for the Little Sisters and other employers, other religious employers that had moral objections to this mandate. So all of that is now part of this case. It's back at the Supreme Court. The justices heard oral arguments this last week, and of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was in her hospital bed. She had some sort of a health issue. She's, I guess, back out now. And then, famously, and we can talk about this later, all the justices asked questions, even Thomas, because in this, it's being done remotely. So it's very interesting, but that's another issue. But anyway, this case has been heard, and the arguments are out there. Some news reports have said, well, the justices' reactions seem to be mixed, which isn't surprising because you've got liberals on the court and people that are more in line to protect the Constitution. So later in the summer, we will hear, and we will hear whether the Little Sisters of the Poor have the opportunity to run their organization in line with their religious beliefs. And, they've stood so firm that I don't think if the court went against them, I don't think they would continue as an organization. They're not going to violate their religious beliefs. I really admire them for the way that they've handled this. But what we hope and pray is that they get a sweeping victory that upholds their rights and their religious liberties in this case.
Yeah, it's, by the way, we don't know. Usually we would know all the opinions would come down by June and the court would, be done. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know
either.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Because usually what happens is they would all leave in July for foreign countries where they would be teaching and enjoying themselves and all this. They take their break in July and August. Are they going to? They're not going anywhere, I don't think, this year. So the question is, I wonder if they will take longer to issue the opinion since they have more time.
They usually are in a meeting, and so they're not in a meeting, too. So, you got to wonder about all this.
And that's the other thing. It's really
Zoom calls and all that.
The whole oral argument is different. Again, most of the listeners probably have never been in a Supreme Court oral argument. When you argue a case at the Supreme Court, most people don't realize. They think, They think you're like giving a speech in front of the 9 justices and they're all crying and clapping and, that's how it works. That's not how it works. You're standing so close to them that you can really only see about 4 justices at one time. And what you're doing is you're really getting pummeled with questions usually. And usually they're coming very fast. So, for instance, if you get 30 seconds uninterrupted, that's unusual. And what they're doing is they haven't talked to one another. They've read all your briefs. They've had 4 of the smartest young attorneys in the country read them. So whatever holes there are in your sides, they know because there's holes in everybody's side, and you just got to be ready. But what's happening is Justice, Sotomayor hits you with a question. She's really not asking you a question. She's really making a point to some other justice or justices. And you have to realize, you have to answer the question, but realize who's talking to who and what they're doing. And so it's very quick, back and forth. There's hypotheticals, and so it's interesting. It really changes a little bit with the telephonic that they're doing right now. I've been listening to some of the arguments, and it's not the same kind of personal, face-to-face, quick kind of interaction. It's still good. They're asking good questions, but the way it's working is the justices are putting in with the Chief Justice, I would like to ask a question. And so the justice, when one question ends, he calls on Justice so-and-so, and then that justice asks a question. And then there's only a certain amount of time for the chief, because he's kind of keeping control of this, because you can't have one question just eat up all the whole time and the other justices don't get to ask. So he is controlling. So like what you'll hear is Justice so-and-so will drone on a little too long in their question, and then the answer will start, and about 20 seconds into the answer, the justice will cut off the person making the argument, saying Justice so-and-so now has a question. And so
these are going on longer, right, the cases, than normal?
Well, I mean, sometimes they are, yes. Just depends on what they want to do. Normally it's just 30 minutes each side, that's it. But it's different. It really is different. I mean, one of the things that shows you how different it is usually Justice Thomas doesn't ask any questions in the oral argument.
But this time he did.
This time he does.
Well, Kelly, the point that you just made about how the questions are really to signal different points to other justices. Justice Thomas' idea is that he likes to let the attorneys argue their cases.
Yeah, he does. And he thinks that a lot of times there's showboating going on by the justices and all this. It is different. I mean, he's asking really particular questions that he wants the answer to, and that others, and there's still a lot of that going on. I mean, Kagan will hit, with a hypothetical that tries to blow up your case, because she's trying to. So they're trying to do things sometimes in their questions, but it's not the same. It is a little different. And I think Little Sisters of the Poor, I mean, I think most people are like, gosh, why is this going on? I mean, it's kind of like, the administration tried to put an end to this by saying, look, let's not force the Little Sisters of the Poor to violate their faith, okay? Let's just end this thing. And then the state of Pennsylvania is like, no, we're not going to allow it to end, and you're kind of like, let it go, leave them alone. I think most of the country's like, stop it. But, and the reality is, and this sort of came up in the questioning a little bit, is it doesn't really work. I mean, one of the reasons we have religious freedom is if the government comes and says, Kerby, we're going to tell you to violate your faith, they're not going to succeed, okay? Because eventually you're going to say, throw me in jail, whatever you have to do. I follow God, not you. Mm-hmm. And the Little Sisters of the Poor are going to do the same. So why this insistence upon continuing to try to push is all because it's an abortion type thing. It's providing, birth control.
Yeah. Well, we need to take a break, and when we come back, I want to give you some action items. And one of those, for those of you that remember Trail Life, they've got a great event taking place tomorrow. And we also want to encourage you to find out a little bit more about First Liberty. So all that coming up right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. It is our weekend edition. I thought I'd give you a couple action items, and the first one is something I mentioned just before we went to the break, and that is a while back we talked with Mark Hancock, who is the CEO of Trail Life, and they did this national backyard camp out. And all of us around the table have children and now grandchildren. Kelly's joined the grandchildren category as well. And it was fun, where you had about 6,000 families doing a virtual camp out in the backyard. Well, they have another thing coming up tomorrow, Saturday, May 16th. It's at 8:45 p.m., which I thought was kind of interesting, in each time zone, because I know we actually broadcast in 4 different time zones. Some people say, why is it somebody says good morning because they're in Alaska, or somebody says afternoon when we're listening in California? So anyway, this actually will be at 8:45 in each time zone. And what they have is, first of all, the gospel music artists Keith and Kristen Getty, which is just going to be wonderful. Then Pilgrim's Progress, the animated film, and then David Benham. And this is all an event, and I won't go into all the details other than just simply go to traillifeusa.com. traillifeusa.com/backyard. And I just thought it'd be kind of fun for you to see that. And if you have children or grandchildren and they're a little bit cabin bound and you want to do something that would be kind of fun, it's called Backyard Movie Night and Camp Out. Now, if you want to camp out and have a tent, I would do that. I remember we used to do that with our kids. Sometimes those backyard campouts were a whole lot better than 1 or 2 of them I did down there at the Pluxee Riverbed when we had more,
At least you can go inside if it rains.
Yes, I remember one time it rained and rained and rained and rained. I said, why am I doing this? This is so awful. So anyway, this is a backyard camp out. Just wanted to mention that because some of you participated last time. And if you want to find out more, just simply go to, as I said before, traillifeusa.com. You can find out some of the details. I thought you'd enjoy that. And anything we can do to encourage families. But, Penna, one of the other things I want to encourage people to do this hour is go to the website firstliberty.org. And we want to really kind of highlight for a few minutes, if we could, what's happening at First Liberty. First of all, you can join up and become an insider. And I've done that. We're not asking, Penna, anybody to do something we're not doing. And second of all, to really seriously consider supporting this ministry that we like to highlight on Fridays, because if nothing else, they are fighting the battles for all of us. So, Kelly, we're just so grateful for what you guys do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really unusual time. When we went into this pandemic, we knew that things were different, and really prayed a lot as a group for God to do a couple of things. Number one, we prayed for wisdom and creativity in how to take advantage of what was different, and really make sure that we were really on top of things. And we immediately started to see that there were going to be some major battles for religious freedom, like historic battles, things that have never happened in our country's history. Isn't that amazing to hear those phrases? But it's true. There's never been any constitutional cases in a pandemic, and the church was right in the middle of all this. And so we prayed for that. And so the result has been, we prayed for God's favor, and every week, all like 8 weeks or however many it's been, something almost miraculous has occurred. Like a victory that we could not even imagine, and it's stuff with the CARES legislation. I mean, there's been something every week that's just mind-boggling, and so we give God the glory for that. But you're right. At the same time, we're literally protecting the church all over the United States and winning these foundational victories. People are getting hit on the giving side, and so obviously the resources that are coming in are way down. So it's like the opposite of, it's like you're really blazing history and protecting everybody's children and grandchildren for the future, but at the same time the resources are coming in less, and meanwhile the need's greater and greater, because our whole point is we've got to come out of this pandemic not with the new normal being everybody's got less freedoms than before. And so we've got to finish this thing out over the next few months or 6 months or however long it is really well. And that's right at the time when people are having a harder time, being supportive of what's going on, even though they really care about it. So it's a kind of an unusual time.
It is. And, when you hear this about how, we've talked in the last couple of segments about how getting religious liberty for churches and making sure they get the rights to open up and all of that, they have those rights are protected. When you hear how crucial that is for the freedom for the whole country and for the idea that the whole country is going to open up, I mean, I think that's a concept that people hadn't really thought of. And there may be a lot of people out there who have not supported First Liberty or perhaps have not supported Point of View, because I think we've done a great job here at Point of View in pointing out some of these things that other outlets are not pointing out. So, if you've heard this, you've heard it for the first time, you think, oh, okay, I want to be part of the solution here. Well, one way is to help support First Liberty, because they are one of the big solutions. And so, there's not much we can do right now. I mean, I really, our church has been trying to help people understand what they can do. But one of the things you need to do is stay safe. So you're not going to go out and put your life on the line. But you can make donations safely. That's something you can do very safely. And it would be something that the benefits would go just nationwide.
And what I've been saying, we've had a number of new people that have gotten involved with us because they've seen what's been going on. And, first, I think everybody knows this, but we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so everybody can make their gifts and tax deductible and all that. But as I've said, people want to be a part of making history. And right now, we're in the middle of it, and so we know we are literally setting history. They're going to look back at the pandemic and the Constitution and religious freedom, and they're going to be talking about what we did right now. And so a lot of people are like, well, I'm not a lawyer. How can I be a part of? Well, this is a way you can actually be a part of it. I mean, you can be a part of setting history and what kind of freedoms your children and your grandchildren are going to have. So I love people to be all sort of in the Army together. We're all marching, and, I'm just not the type that wants to be the person sitting in the stands with a pom-pom. I would rather be marching with the troops. And so I encourage anybody that has that passion that wants to be involved to get involved. And the other thing you mentioned, Kerby, was the Insider.
Insider. It's
real easy. You just go to First Liberty, you can sign up for the Insider, and you'll get an email every week on what is happening. Because you might not even hear about these victories if you're not listening to Point of View that day or whatever. This is a way you can see what's really happening every week in the religious freedom arena. What are the new cases? What are the new decisions? What are people having to fight? What are the new protections or freedoms that your church might have that you don't know about, et cetera? It's easy if you get that information, and then you can share that to educate others as well.
And again, I might just mention, as you go to that website, it's firstliberty.org. Of course, we have it there as well. You'll see a red button or there's a red banner. There's a place where you can put a comment. You might even say, I've been listening to Kelly on Point of View. And that's one of the things they need. And I might just point out that I've seen a remarkable difference between a ministry that has, for example, had a spring banquet. Dallas Seminary had one recently. And you not being able to have your spring banquet. And that hurts you significantly. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to feature them today. When we come back, we're going to talk about all sorts of other things First Liberty's doing in the military and even on big tech surveillance. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, governors and mayors have been clamoring for more testing kits and testing stations. I suspect that they know that more testing isn't a panacea, but they don't have much else to say. Therefore, they blame other political leaders and the medical establishment because they don't have enough testing. First, let's inject some reality into this discussion. President Trump would like the public-private partnership to produce 5 million tests a day. This isn't going to happen for many logistical reasons, but even if we could achieve that unlikely goal, we had 157 million Americans in the workforce before the pandemic. At best, that would provide one test per month. Second, let's also consider what these tests really tell us. If you take the rapid test for the coronavirus and get negative results, what does that really tell you? You might not have the virus. You might have the virus but have not shown symptoms, or you might currently have the virus and the test is flawed. And if you doubt that last possibility, consider the fact that when the rapid test was used on 239 known positive samples at the Cleveland Clinic, the test came back positive 85% of the time. Put another way, it was wrong 15% of the time. That means 15% of people who actually were infected could leave not knowing that they have the virus. In the real world, it appears that the problem is even worse. One scientific paper, not yet peer-reviewed, concluded that the real accuracy of some of these tests was closer to 60%. The problem isn't just the test, but the way it is administered. Sometimes people don't shove the swab stick far enough up their nose to get an accurate sample. It's time to inject some reality into this discussion of testing. The mantra from so many politicians that we need more testing sounds good until you look at the numbers. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. And I thought, Kelly, for just a few more minutes, we might feature some of the other things that people know you for. And one of those is the military. It's interesting because we have Jerry Boykin on Monday to talk about that. I'd like to get, if we can, one of your colleagues, Michael Berry, who's the general counsel there at First Liberty, later in the week, because what you have is a letter that was sent to the Secretary of Defense. Here we go again. Sometimes those in the military don't seem to have their First Amendment rights. Talk about that, if you might.
Well, we've had chaplains and people in the military that, their chapels are closed right now, right? So they're having to be creative in how to reach out, and so they're doing things online. And, one service member, for instance, in Stuttgart, he just invited a bunch of people. He said, I'm going to be out on my porch. We can just sing some gospel songs if people want to. Well, what's happening is Mikey Weinstein and his group and others are complaining. And unbelievably, a bunch of these Army, base commanders and everything are shutting down any discussion of religion, which is wrong. It's a violation. And so we sent a letter, to the Army saying, hey, you've got a problem here. These are violations of the law that you're doing. Of course, chaplains can talk about God. That's their job,
And they can pray.
Yeah. And I will say this. I'm very thankful for Representative Doug Collins out of Georgia. He is a very unique guy, right? Lawyer, military, former preacher. So, and now U.S. Congressman. I think he's running for U.S. Senate in Georgia. What a great guy. But he was an Army he was a chaplain. and I think the Air Force. And anyway, he authored a letter. He saw this, authored a letter. A number of representatives joined, I think Louis Gohmert and others. They sent a letter to I think the Secretary of the Army or one of the top people of the Army, expressing great concern about seeing these incidents and suggesting very strongly that this be stopped and that religious freedom be allowed. So thankful for Representative Doug Collins, but our letter and all this is available. People want to see it. And this is during Military Appreciation Month, so it's a good time to stand with our military and to make sure that our chaplains can be chaplains at a time when they really need to be chaplains, and they're limited from going into their local chapel, and this is one of the ways that they can encourage people.
Well, yeah, I'd say so. Mikey Weinstein is sometimes so over the top. I don't know. I guess I could use the word bold, but not in a good way, because he has so much, gall, I think, for the things that he challenges. So, yes, I'm glad this letter has gone to the Secretary of Defense to protect the service members' religious liberty during the pandemic. You have to do it when there's not a pandemic, and during a pandemic, you still have to do it. I mean, no one is being forced to look at these videos. No one is being forced to be a Christian and be in the military. And so, it's so commonsensical that it should be allowed. And when you think of the sacrifices that people make to serve our country in the U.S. military, and really, common sense, if not our faith, shows us that God he's the motivator for that. And if you're struggling, or if you're suffering, or if you're injured or dying or whatever because of the service, I mean, you call on your Lord, and that all should be encouraged. It makes you a better member of the military. It's not a violation of freedom. In fact, it's the core foundation of our freedoms. So, again, thank you to First Liberty for protecting that.
Well, and I'd encourage people, this is one of those times, I mean, think of all the people serving us in the military and what they're giving up and the sacrifices and what they're going through.
Yes.
They are in a structure that is authoritarian where they can't speak up for themselves. And if we don't, then, nobody's going to be able to do anything about this. So it's really an opportunity for everybody to support them by standing up for them and their religious freedom, since they're actually battling for our religious freedom.
Very good. One other point, and then I thought we'd get into campaign 2020. We had a special election in California and some of that, but the last couple of days, Kelly, I've done some commentaries. Wednesday was on big tech and surveillance, and Thursday was on big tech and censorship. And I didn't know until you came in today that you've actually been involved with some individuals looking at this whole issue of censorship by some of these big tech companies as well.
Yeah, we had a press conference yesterday. It's the first Zoom press conference I've ever had, but it was interesting. But it was really actually excellent. I wish everybody in the country could have been a part of that. It was really sponsored by Brent Bozell at Media Research Center. They have really had a focus on this tech issue and the violations of free speech. They're collecting all the violations around the country so that people can see what's happening. And they sponsored this, talked about the concern, and they had on Senator Marsha Blackburn, because I think most people know her campaign commercials were actually censored.
They were.
By Facebook. Then we had Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is leading the coalition of 51 attorneys general across the country that are looking into Google and the antitrust issue and violations, the fact that they're a monopoly. And then I was the last one to speak. And basically what we were talking about was Facebook has come up with a review panel that's supposed to look over the censorship.
Sorry for laughing. This will make everybody laugh when they hear
number
this
one, we thought it was a really bad idea to do this because the more they look into speech, the more they become censors. And they really don't need to be involved in this. But if they're going to pick a review panel, it needs to be a balanced review panel. The review panel they picked of 20 people, 15 of them are not Americans. So a bunch of people from foreign countries would decide what they think is appropriate to censor and what not in the United States. Well, that's just nuts right off the bat, right? But, of course, the more particular problem is 19 of the 20 that they picked that's supposed to look over whether they're being ideologically, fair and diverse, 19 of the 20 are liberals. There's only one person who's moderately conservative on the whole list. Like 3 or 4 of them are George Soros supported. One of them's a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. One of them said that Trump shouldn't be allowed to be on Facebook. I mean, this is the review panel, okay? Yeah. And so we just blasted it and said, this is ridiculous. And my comments were, look, Facebook, more than any of the other tech groups who are problematic, like Google and Twitter and all that, Facebook actually seems to be trying to do something. So one of two things happened here. Either this is an incredibly cynical pick of a review panel where they just slap the faces of about half of the country, or they're just naive and they don't know how to pick a good committee, and they're supposedly about to announce another 10 or so, and they now know, and they can correct this by putting more balance on the committee. And so I said, we're about to find out. Are they intentionally being,
good question,
unbalanced, or did they make a mistake and they're going to start to correct this? But it's really disturbing that this is their fair, balanced review. It's a bunch of George Soros people.
It's embarrassing.
And Mike McConnell's the only guy on there. I know Professor McConnell, who's, moderately conservative and fair. But, I mean, everybody else, one of the people on the review committee is somebody who attacked the president's son. This is the person you want reviewing content. And again, the whole problem is Facebook and they shouldn't be reviewing content. If they want to review content for things that are criminal, sex trafficking or et cetera, okay, yes. But the idea that they're getting into what they think is true or not, and, what you're saying disagrees with the World Health Organization, so we're taking it down. You think I'm kidding? No, that is what YouTube is doing right now. They're taking down video after video if anybody says something that is not totally consistent with the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization told us that you couldn't transmit the Wuhan virus person to person. So maybe we shouldn't listen to them and have them be the god of all content of truth. So, this is a major problem. These companies, these tech companies, control all of our communication right now. And this is very dangerous, what's going on. And this is not going to be the marketplace of ideas. This is not going to be the United States of America if we don't get a handle on this.
Let me just mention that if you'd like to read a little bit more, my little booklet on social media is an attempt to just sort of document some of that, because some of you might say, well, Kelly's saying that, but I want to read it for myself. And, of course, we got Marsha Blackburn and Ted Cruz and all that in there. I know Penna wanted to say some things, but we have one of those mandatory breaks, so we will come back and talk a little bit more about that. But then we want to get into the campaign. It is going on, and there are all sorts of issues there as well. Also have a CNN poll that then CNN didn't talk about. I wonder why. We'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and we do want to talk about Campaign 2020, but we were talking about big tech censorship. And Penna, I thought I'd try this one out. Facebook announced that it was removing posts intended to organize rallies that would be protesting government stay-at-home policies in a number of states. At first, the spokesperson said, well, that's because the government told us to do that. And a few hours later said, no, we're just doing it because we want to follow the health parameters established by the government. Illustrates the point, doesn't it?
It does. You know, it makes me wonder two things, Kelly. One is, you know, a lot of times when you go to Facebook or any of those social media type companies, and they blame their decisions on algorithms. And they'll say, you know, well, this was not a human that did this, and we'll correct it. Sometimes they do that. Have you heard any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, the Attorney General, Paxton, who was talking, they've looked into a lot of that, and that's
kind of a smoke
screen. The algorithms are very intentionally created for censoring things. And,
sure.
And there's some real problems with that argument. Again, I want to say, of the ones, the Twitters, the Facebook, the YouTube, the Google, the Facebook is actually one of the only ones that's trying.
Yeah.
I just think they're in a losing battle. You can't, once you get into sort of controlling content of speech, you're going to end up censoring people. And they really just shouldn't be in that business. They shouldn't have a review panel. You know, it should be that, is this criminal? You know, and if not...
Obscenity. You might not want obscenity.
Exactly. And if you want to have a review panel for that, fine. But they're doing value judgments, deciding, you know, this is not the marketplace of ideas. When you can't disagree with the World Health Organization, which is, you know, a total mess right now, and they're the standard, that's just one example. But I mean, you've got a mess on your hands. So I think they're in a battle that they just can't. They're never going to be able to win that. But at least they could give the appearance that the review panel is balanced. I mean, that's the thing. It just doesn't make any sense.
No.
Even from their standpoint, if you want to pretend, load it with more liberals than conservatives. But the idea that, can you imagine if they said, we're going to, you know, we've seen a lot of police brutality against African Americans. We're going to do a review panel to make sure that these attacks on African Americans, you know, are looked into. And then they announce the panel, and it's 20 white men and 1 African American. I mean, what message does that send to the African American community, right? I mean, they're going to immediately erupt. Well, that's what conservatives should do at this point.
So that's what you are doing and we are doing. But, you know, I just am skeptical on how much influence we can have. I mean, the leadership of all of those companies is to the left. Some of them are actually vocally that way. So how do you, I mean, I just don't have a whole lot of hope for that. I mean, I think it's good that we're trying to weigh in, and but we never seem to be able to get anywhere with big media. We just don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of the solutions to it are very difficult because these people have a lot of power, Facebook and Google, and I mean, they're even fighting back and being just obstinate and belligerent to the attorney generals. I mean, the fact that you think you can stonewall 51 attorney generals is incredible. That's what Google's doing. They're filing a bunch of, you know, crazy things that kind of slow down the investigation and all this. But there are a lot of options that really can get their attention in major ways. One are antitrust, both federal and state, because these are monopolies. They're controlling everything right now. Number two, though, in addition to monopolies and all that, I mean, they're consumer protection violations. I think all of these are consumer protection violations. They're coming into your state and saying, oh, we're being fair to everybody. And it's a lie. You know, we're not putting our thumb on the scale. Well, yes, you are. Things are leaking all the time that's showing that what you're really doing. That is fraud. To tell people here, we're going to, you know, we're going to have you buy this service, by the way, and by providing all your personal information, that's what you're really paying. We're going to provide this service, but we're going to be fraudulent. Well, now the state attorney general can come after you, and there are penalties per violation per person it would cripple these groups. So they can be brought into play. But in addition to that, I think ultimately the thing that would really work is if enough consumers demanded that the privacy violations and the censorship violations stop, or, they will stop and go somewhere else. And
where else do they really have to go right now?
There are alternatives springing up, but it's very hard to compete with a monopoly like this. And so that's the major problem.
Because it's social media, so the whole world's on it.
That's
so
right.
how do you leave it and go somewhere else?
Yeah.
It's
That's right.
hard.
That's the difficulty.
Well, again, we will continue to follow that and certainly have some material that's coming out even more recently in our Outlook magazine. But, Penna, let's, if we can, look at Campaign 2020. And you had a special election in California, which I suspect many of our listeners have not heard about because it didn't go the way the mainstream media wanted to talk about. And then that also relates to the fact that CNN did this great poll that then they didn't even take any time to publicize, because if you don't get the answer you're looking for, sometimes they just ignore it. But what happened in California?
Well, in California, there's a House seat, and it was actually left open because this one Democrat, Katie Hills.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she was kind of a deviant.
Yes.
And she ended up leaving office, and so there was a special election, and a Republican one, Mike Garcia. And it's interesting because this was actually a Republican seat until Hillary flipped it during the 2016 election. And that district went for Hillary, and a Democrat won, and Katie. And she's gone, and now we've got Mike Garcia back. So that's just interesting. They did have to mail a ballot to every registered voter in this House district because, of COVID-19. But there was also in-person voting if you chose to do so. So that's kind of how that worked. Of course, that's maybe a preview of what Newsom will try to do in November. But also on this poll, CNN poll, well, first of all, the less people see Joe Biden, the better for him. 47% of Democrats cannot define who he is beyond being just anti-Trump. So that's part of this. But this poll, CNN, its own poll out there, actually still shows that Joe Biden is winning nationally. Ahead of Trump. But in 15 battleground states, Trump is outperforming Biden. And that is huge because you don't win a national election. You win state by state. So if Trump is winning battleground states, and that many of them, that is huge. But so CNN apparently kind of tried to downplay, in fact, really left it out of a lot of its reporting.
Yes.
Putting a lot of other news up ahead of that. And so, you're not surprised in one sense, but that is big news. I mean, the other part of this is Trump actually nationally had never scored higher in a CNN poll, and they neglected to report that also.
And again, that's just something I wanted to put up there because, first of all, the only poll that really matters is in November. But when you see these polls where they're either not reported, which, again, think how much money CNN spent that did not even promote their own poll because it didn't get the answer they were looking for.
Well, it's just what we're dealing with. We're talking about social media. We talk about big media. They're so far to the left. We just have to go different directions to get our news.
So again, I don't take too much stock on some of these polls. I think people aren't necessarily always giving an answer to the polls, but nevertheless, I just wanted you to see one that looked the other way. But back to California for just a minute, because the governor, Gavin Newsom, now has signed an executive order requiring every registered voter, including those listed as inactive, to be mailed a ballot this November. Now, just think this through. In Los Angeles County alone, the registration rate is 112% of the adult population. So you obviously have that. And, of course, nationwide, we have 378 U.S. counties in which there are more citizens of voting age in the county, people registered to vote than people of voting age in the county. And you just say, that's a prescription for some kind of fraud, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. And there's a reason why we have people vote in person, and why if you don't vote in person, there are usually a lot of things in place to try to make sure that there's not fraud. And in almost every state, ballot harvesting is a crime. The idea that you go collect other people's mail-in votes and do that, only in California is it okay, because it leads to a lot of fraud. And so these are we see this all the time when people check the voting rolls. They find all these people on the voting rolls that, when you go to their home, it's like an abandoned lot, or it's, a place that would hold like 1 or 2 people and 10 people are registered there, or, their names are like Mickey Mouse and other people, so you find this all the time, and it's a real problem. And I think this is, sacrosanct, really, in American politics. We need to make sure that we clean these voter rolls and that we get really, solid information to make sure that there's not voter fraud. I mean, that's something we shouldn't allow to happen in this country.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we might talk a little bit more about that. Heritage Foundation database so far has collected 1,285 different proven cases of voter fraud, and they're not even comprehensive. So there must be some out there. We'll be right back.
The Little Sisters of the Poor is a religious order that runs nursing homes for the poor. They're back at the U.S. Supreme Court to hopefully conclude their nearly 8-year battle against the Obamacare contraceptive mandate, obligating these nuns to provide their employees with birth control. Under the Affordable Care Act, workplace health plans are supposed to cover preventative care, which the Obama administration said meant birth control with no out-of-pocket costs. Churches are exempt, and the Hobby Lobby case won exemptions for closely held businesses whose owners hold faith-based objections to the mandate. For Hobby Lobby, the issue was that some contraceptives work by causing abortions. The Obama administration created an accommodation that provided cost-free contraception through alternate means. The Little Sisters argued they need an exemption, not an alternate way to comply with the contraceptive mandate. In 2016, the High Court agreed to hear Zubik v. Burwell, a case that involved the sisters and other nonprofits who sincerely object to paying for contraceptives. Upon the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, to avoid a 4-4 split, the court opted not to rule on the merits and instead vacated the lower court cases and sent them back to their respective states to consider, based on the accommodation. In 2017, the Trump administration issued new rules, providing even broader protections to the Little Sisters and other employers with religious and moral objections to the mandate. Pennsylvania, where the Little Sisters is headquartered, and New Jersey sued, arguing that the Trump administration exceeded its power and that the opt-out proposed by the government does not substantially burden religious exercise. Last week, the justices heard oral arguments via teleconference, with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dialing in from her hospital bed. The current pandemic makes the Little Sisters' work more difficult and much riskier. The justices would do well to hand them a sweeping victory so they can continue the work we as a society need them to do. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And for a few more minutes, if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. If not, love to go around the round table since we are in the midst of Campaign 2020. Don't want to forget that. But the pandemic has changed everything, hasn't it, Penna?
We don't even really know if the state of Texas, for instance, I mean, they have a convention scheduled for later in the summer.
Supposed to be today.
Yeah, I know. It's supposed to start today.
Isn't that something?
And the national conventions, the DNC and the RNC conventions, both supposed to be in August. And, all of that is up in the air. I mean, there will be a nominee from both parties, no matter whether there's a convention or not, but it would be so different not to have one. And also, the election issues. I mean, we've got all our normal issues, but they've changed because President Trump was running on his economic accomplishments. And, he said with the coronavirus, well, we hope for a V-shaped comeback. And now it's more like a Nike swish. It's going to be, it'll come back once everything is reopened, but it's partly because every state's not consistent in how they're reopening, but also partly because I think Americans are varying opinions about how much they want to reenter themselves. I mean, you may have churches opening and a lot of people not going. You may have businesses opening and a lot of people not frequenting them. Even as we started this, we started with people starting to get skittish and to stop doing some things, going out to dinner before anything was even closed down. It's going to be the same way and probably even worse going back. So the recovery will not be quick or not be swift. So the economy will be a different kind of issue than President Trump expected to have. But the other part of it will be, how did he handle this, and how well have we recovered to the point of voting? And, Dennis Prager said this, the battle is right now, you see the country very divided on our reaction to coronavirus. It's between the merely inconvenienced and the rest of America. Mm-hmm. And, I would say that those of us around this table, we're all busy. We're merely inconvenienced. But there are a lot of people whose livelihoods or businesses are gone. And, the government's trying to do what it can to help get us through. And so the degree to which we get through it and get over it, and a lot of that will be apparent by November, not all of it. That's going to be a big, big election issue, probably the most important election issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, we know what's going to happen. We know that the Democrats are going to think we've got to attack Trump for not handling this well. I think most Americans might not like his style in the press conferences, right? I mean, the president's always self-promoting. But I really think that these attacks that he missed it. He was too late. I think Americans don't buy that. They see that he took action actually before anybody wanted to with the banning of the travel ban from China, and that he's done the best he could do with the expertise he had. I don't think they're gonna go for these sort of political, sort of advantageous, just because it doesn't ring true to most Americans. So I think it's really going to be more, what do they feel about the economy, right? So as we go into November, not even is the economy booming again, because it probably won't be booming by then, but what is the trajectory? And if the trajectory is coming back and the explanation given by like Mnuchin and different people is, here's our plan, here's what we see. And the American people are going to look at that, I think, and they're going to say, this guy got the economy going pretty well. It looks like it's starting to come back. Do I really want to go with a totally unproven other person? And especially if it's Joe Biden, I think there's going to be lots of questions about Joe Biden anyway. So I think if things are trending back, I think it's going to be Trump is going to be in a very actually good position. And I don't think the attacks trying to blame the coronavirus on him is going to work, because I think people, last time people saw through the media, the manipulation, the attacks, and they just wanted somebody they thought was going to do something for them instead of for all the deep state and the congressmen and women in D.C. And if they feel like it's going to be good for them on the economic front and et cetera, I think they'll go with Trump. And so that, to me, it's more the economy than it is anything else as we get to November.
But I also think even though Trump just takes so much criticism and gets so much for every little thing that he does, the fact that we did not overwhelm any hospital system. I mean, New York came very close, but the federal government helped them to weather their worst storm, and they did. And the rest of the country, it just hasn't been anywhere near the devastation to human life and health that the model showed. And I think when you get to November, and that's part of the equation for your voting, you're going to say that was that was good. I mean, the federal government, it made mistakes, and this is an unprecedented problem that nobody expected. So you can't expect perfection or preparedness. But the fact that we've gotten through the health part of it, I think, with much less death and devastation than the model showed, I think it'll be probably on balance in his favor.
How do the governors affect this?
Yes.
Donald Trump won Michigan by only 10,000 votes. That sounds like a lot until you realize how many votes were cast.
Yep.
Only 10,000 votes. He won Wisconsin by 27,000 votes. Right now, the two governors, let's just pick out Michigan and Wisconsin, they're not exactly real popular in their communities right now. So does that help him?
I do think they're helping him. I think people are getting angry. I mean, these are abusive. Michigan is at the top of one of the governors who's more abusive and arrogant and power hungry, and just
tyrannical.
Yeah, and so I think that's only going to help. But I think if you look at it, I think there are things that weren't done well in dealing with this, but there are things that they wouldn't blame Trump for mostly. Fauci got his numbers wrong, right? They were going off these models that weren't accurate.
Right.
They didn't have the testing quickly, but that was the FDA and the CDC's fault, right? I mean, I don't have anybody saying, well, Trump's a scientist. He should have figured this out, right? I mean, and they're shutting things down. They're hurting the economy unnecessarily. That's the governors. It's not Trump. So yes. I think the things that were advantageous that were probably only Trump-like is the travel ban from China, which I don't think any other president would have done, and his instincts of sort of deregulating everything and allowing all these private industries to come in and help. I don't think a lot of people would have done that. I think that's more him. And so he gets credit, I think, for some things that he did that maybe wouldn't have been done. And I think most of the things he's going to be criticized for, I mean, they'll try, but I think most of the things that critically, could have been done better, they're probably not going to pin on him because I think it would have happened with almost anybody.
Some people will try.
Yeah, they'll try.
Let me just, before we run out of time, encourage you to go to firstliberty.org. First of all, on Thursday, you're going to have this special broadcast on the nation's military heroes. So that's now on the website, which just loaded just a few minutes ago. So I can mention that. We will be talking about the military on Monday. I'll promote it again as well. And most importantly, I just encourage you to support First Liberty. They are our partners. And Kelly, it's always great that you come in and spend some time with us.
Well, thanks for having me on.
As I said, Penna, Kelly's not looking for things to do, and the fact that he gives us 3 hours,
busier than ever,
it just illustrates again his commitment to Point of View. So we're committed to him as well. So you should find all the information you need on our website, pointofview.net, or you can go to firstliberty.org. Have a great weekend. I hope you will enjoy it because, as I said, we'll have Jerry Boykin on Monday. We'll talk about the military. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.